name is Roni Ben-Aharon. I work for Atlantis Dive Resorts in the Philippines, and I want to tell you the story of Apo Island, a small island in the middle of the Philippines that has made a great impact on conservation efforts in the Philippines. So this is the Philippines, an archipelago of 7,643 islands, approximately 300 square kilometers, about the size of Italy if you put all the islands together. And it's got 4 large bodies of water around it. You got the Philippine Sea on the east side, the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea, depending who you ask, and then the Celebes Sea and the Sulu Sea. And it is a global hotspot for marine biodiversity. Why? Because it's located in the northwest side of the Coral Triangle. It is obviously, this is not a coral triangle that I'm talking about, but this is the coral triangle I'm talking about. It's an imaginary triangle putting together 6 aquatic nations. And basically, the gist of it is that the Coral Triangle is a home to over 65% of the reef-building coral species in the world and 70% of the fish population in the world. It is also a habitat for feeding, breeding, mating, and whatnot for migratory animals. All of this basically means that within the Coral Triangle, when you go diving, every time you put a mask on and put your face in the water, you are likely to see more things than you can see in places that are not within the Coral Triangle. So the biodiversity that exists in the Coral Triangle is what attracts us divers to go diving in these locations. So this actually Philippines is blessed. It is blessed with incredible reefs and very biodiverse marine life. But of course, as humans, right, we do almost everything that we can deliberately or undeliberately destroy it. And so in the last years, as everybody knows, conservation has definitely been a big topic. And how does conservation start about in a country like the Philippines, a third world country where most of the people depend on the sea for their bountiness? In the Philippines, the conservation efforts are mainly concentrated around marine protected areas, or what we call MPAs. And they are set under the national law and a bunch of other legislation at the federal level. We have over 1,500 marine protected areas in the Philippines. Most of them are what we call small marine protected areas, and they're about 12 hectares in size, so 300 by 400 meters. And they're literally just like these buoys in areas in the sea. And if you've been diving in the Philippines, you have for sure seen them. So how did it all begin? This is the tale of Apo Island. Apo Island is located off Negros Island, which is this island over here where my cursor is. It's in the middle of the country in the area called Visayas. And it is about 40 minutes in front, or 40-minute boat ride from Darwin, Dumaguete. So fishing in the Philippines, what is it? It is more than just an industry. It's actually a way of life. Filipinos, over 100 million of them, rely on the sea for their livelihood. If you've ever been to the Philippines and you notice what the cuisine is, it's fried fish for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything with fish. And so 100 million people who are eating a lot of fish requires a lot of fish. The interesting fact is that unlike many other countries, there are over 1 million Filipinos on a daily basis that engage in marine fishing. And when we say marine fishing, we don't mean like big vessels and stuff like that. We mean exactly what you see in the picture, which are small canoe boats that people use in order to go fishing with a small net, with a line, whatever it may be. So 80% of those 1 million people are actually small scale operators, let's call them that. They're not really operating. They got a little boat, they got a little net, or the whole family goes together like you see here in the photo, just march into the ocean with the big net and scrape it out. And so that kind of industry is obviously the last in the food chain of the fishing industry. And of course, they're facing an uncertain future because they're seeing less and less fish. Why? Well, you know, that's a little bit of a rhetorical question, obviously. The reason they're seeing less fish is because there's more deep sea commercial fishing. Lots of Chinese boats around the Philippines scraping out the ocean. And a lot of destructive fishing techniques that have been going on for years and years in the Philippines. Dynamite fishing, muro-ami, which is basically you're taking a huge concrete block and attaching it to the boat, to a crane, and then dropping it on the reef, and then coming out with the same crane and taking out everything with a net. That's more Ami. And these destroying the fish natural habitat actually damages the fish population. If somebody came in and destroyed your house, how likely are you to reproduce? That is really the question. And now we're going to divert a little bit to the side and tell you what started happening in the Visayas. So there is an island called Sumilon Island. That island is very close to Oslo, off the shores of Cebu. It is located off the coast of Cebu in front of Oslo. And in 1974, a university in Dumaguete, which is considered to be one of the best universities in the Philippines, especially for marine biology, it's called Silliman University. And it has Marine Laboratory Department launch a project to study the effects of a marine protected area on the recovery of the fish population. The idea was not to conserve the ocean. I just want to say that and put it out there. The idea was to increase the fishing yields. So they were looking at conservation method as a way to increase the fish population so they can go on and fish more in a more sustainable way. This guy, who is today like 96, is the guy who started this research. His name is Dr. Angel Alcala. He is the son of fishermen from Negros Occidental. And so he was born in a coastal town where his parents and uncles and aunties and whatever went fishing on a daily basis. And as a child, he was seeing less and less and less and less fish. And so when he became a marine biologist and later became the national marine scientist of the Philippines, he wanted to study the relationship between conservation and fish population, which of course today we know, but this is 1974. And his assumption for the research was that a healthy ecosystem inside the marine protected area will actually benefit the surrounding communities of fish. And so how is that exactly going to happen? It's going to happen through adult fish spillover. So basically adult fish that live in the marine protected areas are going to swim off to a place that's not protected, and then they could get fish there. And it's going to go through larval exchange. So a larva would exchange between two different marine protected areas, increasing the fish population in both and in other non-marine protected areas around. And so between 1972 and 1984, he just collected data in Sumilon Island. And what he was studying is how susceptible are fish to destructive fishing methods and overfishing. And a grand surprise, and before that, and how long it takes the fish population to recover. The grand surprise was that after 10 years of research, they finally actually had the scientific proof that destructive fishing mechanisms and destroying the fish natural habitat damages the fish ability to reproduce. So actually, fish reproduce less when they're under stress. I know it makes sense, but they didn't have any scientific evidence to that until that time. And so now they were able to scientifically prove it. And being able to prove this relationship not only validated the need for marine protected areas from a conservation perspective, of course, but also it has a solid economical value. Unfortunately, in 1984, the Sumilon Island Marine Protected Area status was revoked as a local governor was running for office and basically told the people, you see, after 10 years you weren't allowed to fish here, now we have more fish. So if you vote for me, I'm going to let you fish there. And that's what happened. Nevertheless, that message was actually carried across. It was carried across to a place called Apo Island, the one I was telling you about. It's a very small island with about 1,000 people on it. There's no running water. There's no electricity. Every single person on that island was living off fishing. And then they would cross the small channel that leads to Negros Oriental, and then they would sell the fish there. So they're all traditionally coastal fishermen. And in 1982, Dr. Alcala went to that community to ensure he's going to get the support of the community after the lessons that he's learned in Sumilon Island. And so he figured, if I have the community with me, then maybe what happened in Sumilon won't happen again, and we will be able to have a conservation status through the community to the ocean. And so, who were then teenagers at the time, listened to his speech and bought into it. And later, they actually became the leaders of Apo Island. And so, the Apo Island Marine Protected Area, the community in 1982 decided to allocate 10%, only 10% of the southeast part of the island as a marine protected area. And it was the community who governed it. They created a marine management council, which bans a destructive fishing mechanism, by and large, all around the island, but also they've established like a sea shepherd, a bantay dagat in Tagalog. And the bantay dagat was able to enforce without any punishment mechanisms or whatnot. It was basically able to enforce if people came fishing, they were able to say, hey guys, this is off limits, but it was still the same people from the same community. And so they knew each other. And so in 1994, Apo Island became part of the National Integrated Marine Protected Area of the Philippines. And so little by little, we were able to gain the momentum and to gain the validation from the government. Apo Island Marine Protected Area is the longest consecutive, most successful community managed marine protected area in the Philippines. So since 1984, since that status had started until today. So we're talking over 30 years of protection. And the trickle effect was insane. The message of Apo Island was carried by the currents to all the nearby communities. And nowadays, there are over 1,500 marine protected areas, third of which are in the Visayas. Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick look at the time. Good, I'm trying to run through this fast, but this is really the gist of the presentation, guys. What happened in Apo Island, the fact that the marine protected area has been protected for so long, created a continuum from a scientific perspective for data collection. So basically what we're starting to see now is additional research that is coming upon based on the marine protected area and the fact that people know it's a marine protected area for 30 years of protection. You can now actually make more assumptions. And that study of larval export is what we're going to be talking about next. So a reef fish life cycle goes through egg, larva, juvenile, and adult. A lot of the larva, which lasts around 1 to 10 weeks, depending on the species, gets carried away by the oceans. What does this mean? You've got the eggs, and when the larva stage arrives, basically most of the fish do not stay in that particular location where they hatched, okay? And so what happens is that the ocean currents come in and drag all the little ones away. During that time when they're traveling, they're going to finally get to a destination, another reef, and that's where they're going to settle and hopefully grow to be an adult and hopefully a spawning adult. And so a fish larva travels far from home. They reach adulthood and then they spawn, which means that fish from one location are actually able to travel from one location to the other and settle on the reef, and then have an effect, if you remember Dr. Alcala, have an effect that from one marine protected area, they're able to travel through and end up in a completely different area. And in that completely different area, they're settling and they're growing, and that is the adult spillover. And so we've got, the big question is how far from home do fish babies travel? And that is the question of Dr. Rene Abesamis. He is a marine biologist, actually a friend of mine, a very interesting guy. He went to school in Australia, he did his PhD in Australia, and worked with Dr. Alcala. And so he decided to study the distance that the fish larva travels to see the relationship between marine protected areas. Because when he did the study, started it 5 years ago, we've already had over 1,000 marine protected area, a third of which are in the Visayas, where Apo Island is located. And so he wanted to study the relationship. And so he took 3,000 DNA samples of vagabond butterfly fish, the one here in the upper right corner. And he was looking for DNA matches between the juvenile fish and their parents to set the connection between an offspring and the parent. And then by matching those pairs, he can actually measure the distance. And the study found that the fish larvae travel as far as 120 kilometers, but on average travels 85 kilometers. This is Dr. Roni Ben-Aharon's, this is Apo Island. So in Apo Island, you can see here how beautiful it is and the beautiful turquoise water of it. And that's Roni over there. And this means that the larva produced by a marine protected area has a strong chance of affecting other marine protected areas. How? Is if you've got a marine protected area on one side, and then the fish larva travels and lands in another marine protected area on the other side. This basically means that if where the larva lands, if there is no marine protected area, then you've got basically no chance of that fish growing and being an adult. And so if they do land in another marine protected area, touché, they can actually grow, they can become an adult, and they can spawn. And so that concept meant that it's not only about one single marine protected area, it's about giving the fish the chance to grow up and to become a spawning adult. And for that, we need other marine protected areas. And so basically, if fish larva travels 85 to 120 kilometers, you've got so many other marine protected areas that interact with each other, and all of those together increase the fish population. And so when we're connecting the dots between Dr. Alcala's study and Dr. Ben-Aharon's study, we find that females inside the marine protected areas produce more eggs. Like we said in the beginning, if you've got a nice home and you're all settled and nested, your reproductive systems are more efficient. And marine protected areas can synergize with each other through larval exchange. And so, which, along with the adult spillover, can accelerate the recovery of a fish population in areas that were destroyed by dynamite fishing and other destructive fishing techniques. So, for example, let's say we've got a completely destroyed area, and then we've got a bunch of other marine protected areas. And once we take the destroyed area and declare it as a marine protected area, because of the other marine protected areas around it, it's going to be able to recover faster. And this is actually a great visual representation. And you can see Apo Island there, right? And this is Apo Island. And these are other marine protected areas alongside Negros Oriental coast. This is Darwin, where Atlantis Dive Resorts is located. One of our resorts. This is Bacon, where I live, and other townships. And so you can see here the interactions between the different marine protected areas, not only adult spillover, but also larval exchange. This, guys, is the essence of marine protection areas in the Philippines. And the fact that the trickle effect means that having 1 or 2 or 5 or 20 is not enough. Having a bunch and having them spread through is what helps the fish population recover. And so if we are able to continue this message, support it, how are we able to support it as divers? When you get to a place, you've got marine fees, pay them. You know, this is a great way to show the community that there is an actual economic value to other things but fishing, and that they can sustain this and actually have these different spots where you've got all these places where small fish can become spawning adults. And then overall, we're going to have more fish. So we are waiting for you guys. We're waiting for you in the Philippines. We're waiting for you in Apo Island. We're waiting to see you. And come dive with us. Come see the beauty of the Philippines and help create and make a difference in marine conservation, one fish at a time.